I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week we are going to be looking at the film Shaolin Soccer, directed by Stephen Chow. And if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is pick a different film, a different Asian film that is, to try to help us understand the wide world of Asian cinema throughout the history of movies. Essentially, we want to cover a different director and a different one of their movies every single week to help you get a better understanding of that there are filmmakers more than Akira Kurosawa or Bong Joon-ho or Hayao Miyazaki, some of the more popular ones, that there's many other great directors who are making other great movies in different styles throughout the history of movies that I highly recommend you check out. But you guys have been really showing a lot of support for these videos, commenting below, letting me know your thoughts on the movies. Please do continue to do that. I highly appreciate it. And let me know if there's any filmmakers that you'd like to see me cover. We do try to keep things, a little bit more obscure and keep you guessing week to week, but these are still very easily accessible movies, where if you do like some other Asian movies, you have seen Seven Samurai or maybe Yojimbo or some of the Miyazaki movies, then maybe you can check out A Perfect Blue, or in this case, Shaolin Soccer. And the way we've been structuring these videos is the first part, we discuss the filmmaker and why I wanted to cover him, because in this case, it's the only time we're going to be talking about him before we move on to a different filmmaker next week. And then the second half of the video, we talk about the movie itself. So, starting off now with the discussion of Stephen Chow, why I really want to discover more about his movies and cover him on the show is to show the difference between what international cinema used to be and kind of what it is right now. And that is, it used to be a very kind of niche, cult-like experience. When you think of the 70s and 80s, a lot of those film fans were discovering the films of someone like Seijun Suzuki, who was making movies in the 50s and 60s. In the 90s, you had kind of a hot period where John Woo and the Hong Kong action movie scene really started to blossom, and Jackie Chan, and there's a lot of love there. But when I think of the 2000s, I think of someone like Stephen Chow, who had a cult-like following and still does, but when I think about him, I think of this very specific period of time of kind of like the Shaolin Soccer Kung Fu Hustle period, where he had been starring in movies in the 90s in Hong Kong as an actor, but now directing his own movies, creating a unique style that is wholly his own. And while movies like this or Kung Fu Hustle actually made a good amount of money at the box office here in the US, I still think there was a bit of a cult-like or a niche following, and still has very specific, intense fans for a filmmaker like Stephen Chow, where it was entertaining and it was exciting and it made some money at the box office for Miramax, but we weren't really considering it for awards. If you didn't see it in theaters and the internet, it wasn't as large as it is today, you'd have to check it out on a DVD. Even someone like a filmmaker like Park Chan-wook, who's very popular today, has got the Sympathizer TV show out right now on HBO, Robert Downey Jr., he's big time. But in the early 2000s, it was Old Boy, and it was people going like, wow, check out this really strange, messed up horror movie kind of by this Asian director. And that was kind of the way these filmmakers grew and expanded. But now with the directors like Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho or, even Ryosuke Hamaguchi, these are the international directors of today, but these international directors are winning Best Picture. It is kind of weird to see just how influential Stephen Chow is on the modern kind of Best Picture winners. You look at a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that is totally influenced by Stephen Chow and Jackie Chan and kind of their zany energy, and that wins Best Picture. Back in 2001, it would have been insane to think of Shaolin Soccer even contending, let alone winning Best Picture. And then you look at another filmmaker like Bong Joon-ho. You look at some of his movies like Okja or The Host even. These are kind of weirder, stranger, kookier movies. And then he ends up winning Best Picture for Parasite. So Stephen Chow was, I think a necessary evolution of the genre, where it actually these international movies started to make money in the US, but they weren't necessarily getting the awards attention. But he was very influential, I think, in inspiring the types of movies that are winning Best Picture at the Oscars, but just in general helping, international cinema really flourish. But speaking about the filmmaker himself, what he's so great at is that when you're watching a Stephen Chow movie, you're watching a Stephen Chow movie. He's like a Tarantino or a Nolan, in which he was so popular that we actually got to see, parodies or, other types of movies that try to be like Stephen Chow movies, in the same way you would get, the Tarantino type ripoffs in the 90s. He's so distinctive of a filmmaker in that way, and it's a Stephen Chow movie in particular because not only is he directing it, helping writing the movie, but oftentimes he's starring in the movie. So when you're talking about the history of Asian cinema, he's very much in the kind of lineage of the Bruce Lees, of the Jackie Chans. He has that similar energy, dedication to kung fu or martial arts. So speaking of his style in particular, it's a very cartoony style. It's a very silly style, but it's also a very funny style. He's a maximalist filmmaker. Every shot is cranked up to 100. You can think of like the Bruce Lee movies of the 70s, or like the Shaw Brothers movies, those kind of kung fu martial art movies in the 70s and 80s. If you think about movies like that, Stephen Chow is essentially taking the bones of that story structure and making it funny by accentuating everything, by making the guy who has this really awesome leg be so much better. He can kick a soccer ball up in the air and it doesn't arrive back down for an hour later. He's that much of a kung fu master in some of his movies. But even when he steps out of the frame and still is a director, he doesn't rely as much on his persona, but he still has those kind of bones of a cartoony style or fairy tale-esque structure. I'm thinking of movies like The Mermaid or Journey to the West. So it's taking the kind of bones of the movies that he loves, like the Shaw Brothers movies, but then injecting this Looney Tunes type energy by just accentuating everything. So much more power in the kicks, so much more kind of stakes in the story. In a movie like Shaolin Soccer, they're literally trying to be a team called Team Evil. There are clear good guys and bad guys. And just like a cartoon character, there's very clearly defined people. There's the fat guy, the guy who smokes a lot, the landlady. There's various kind of distinctive tropes and personas that reappear throughout many of his movies. And he likes those kind of broad strokes of characters. So he takes that bones of the Shaw Brothers kind of kung fu action element, and he makes it very intense and maximalist and over the top, but it's not over the top in the same way like a Dragon Ball Z is big and over the top. It's more so funny and silly, closer to a Jackie Chan movie, or like I mentioned, a cartoony sense of energy where there is no realism. They break all the rules of reality, and as a result, you have these very broad characters, these broad storytelling techniques, but it makes sense within the world because he's trying to have as much fun and as much silliness as you can. And that's the best way to describe things in terms of recommending his movies. It's more Barbie than Oppenheimer. If you like a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Stephen Chow, is definitely an influence on that film. So you can see a lot of this kind of kookiness and the strangeness, but also some of that heart as well. He's a really fascinating filmmaker, and a one of one for sure. But speaking about now the movie that we're going to be talking about, Shaolin Soccer. If you don't know, it's about a kind of wandering kung fu master who teams up with a disgraced ex-soccer player who's trying to put together his own team to beat and seek revenge on the owner of his old team, and in the way kind of get redemption and money for their story. So it's a classic sports movie structure. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the good guys and there's the bad guys. Of course, the Kung Fu Master doesn't know how to play soccer, and none of his brothers know how to play soccer either. So we have to go through that kind of sports montage of learning, and there's a love story, there's good guys and bad guys. It's very broad in its structure and its storytelling, but that's actually what I really love about it. It's funny, it's silly, it's great, but Chow as a filmmaker, and that's what we're kind of wanting to analyze within this series, is very talented. I think it's very easy to look at a movie that's fun and silly, but not appreciate necessarily the craft that goes into it. Just recently, in terms of the Oscars, someone like a Greta Gerwig, right? Barbie gets nominated for Best Picture, gets all these other nominations. She doesn't get in for Best Director because it's not as serious as maybe something like The Zone of Interest with Jonathan Glazer. Oftentimes comedies and the silliness people have so much fun with it, they don't realize the kind of craft and detail and attention that is brought to these films. And in this movie in particular, what Chow brings is a extremely economical storytelling. Every filmmaker is looking to try to tell their story in the best way possible, whether that be visually, whether that be in as short of a time as possible. They're always trying to cram as much within their kind of runtime. Now, a filmmaker like Michael Mann, for example, leans totally into realism, totally into rules. He wants everything to feel genuine and authentic, so that he doesn't have to explain things, so that when you see Robert De Niro in a movie like Heat, you know he looks like a professional, you know he knows what he's doing based on some of his actions, so you don't need to have a backstory about him in prison and blah, blah, blah. You just immediately kind of understand that he's a professional innately. And that's Mann's way of doing economical storytelling. Stephen Chow's is the complete opposite, but equally as good. It's about using very broad stereotypes, very general stereotypes, so that within the first 5 minutes, we get the backstory of this, ex-soccer player who destroys his leg because someone in the crowd kind of hits it with a baseball bat, but that was set up by this other teammate who now in the modern day is super successful and has everything that the guy who broke his leg wants. And the kind of amount of coincidences and setups are classic storytelling structure, but it also helps us understand the tone and atmosphere. In the first 5 minutes, we just see bad thing after bad thing happen to this guy, and the guy who's clearly evil and did all of this in malatent has been gotten so much success. So we immediately kind of understand, okay, there's our hero, there's our villain, and we're off and running within the first 5 minutes, and we have a motivation for why we want this team to win, just quickly within the first 5 minutes. And then also, because we're using these broad strokes, these amount of coincidences that are so funny, the line delivery, the kind of intense score and swooning camera movement, we immediately understand what type of movie this is, which is so important for a director to do, is to give us that understanding of, oh, I'm in this type of movie, there is no realism, this is going to be funny, this is going to be silly, there's going to be broad strokes of a story, fairy tale-esque, you could say as well. But that's still a testament to the director and being able to communicate that tone to a first-time watcher immediately without even knowing any of Chow's movies. You kind of understand the vibe that he's going for, which is very difficult to do, and there's a reason why he caused a bit of a movement of people trying to recreate these types of movies or make parody movies in a similar vein to this that don't of course work as well because they don't have the source filmmaker. And then aside from the economical storytelling, Chow as director is super visually engaging because he's a maximalist. There's so much creativity within this movie in particular. If someone kicks a soccer ball, it will turn into a fireball, which will turn into, a fire-shaped tiger as it attacks someone. If someone like the girl in the movie is so hideous that she has to have all these kind of cysts and whatnot all over her face. She can't just be mildly unattractive. She has to be the most unattractive as possible. But then when their love story pays off, we get this very kind of sweeping, swooning camera movement that kind of floats and betrays the rules of reality of how cameras are supposed to work because it's tapped into the emotion of the storytelling. So it's so creative and so much fun within the movie, all the different ways of trying to express those emotions, whether that be love, whether that be intensity, whether that be the montage of being impressed by certain things. It's just everything is heightened, the camera is constantly moving, zooming in, use of visual effects to make this more of a fantastical world that doesn't exist in real life. It's just a really fun movie that kind of has this great structure of a sports movie that is also supremely directed because of the tone that is immediately established within those first few minutes and then just expounded upon every minute afterwards. Chow, in this movie in particular, is a prime example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the films of Stephen Chow, if you've seen them, if you like them, if you are part of the kind of cult that he definitely had in the kind of early 2000s, or if you've seen some of his most recent movies. A movie like The Mermaid is very excellent and reminiscent of Chow's movies, and they're always fun to see because of how unique and distinctive they are. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.